Story 1. The 2008 financial crisis is a big example. Before it hit, a lot of people believed the housing market was rock solid, and many experts and institutions assured everyone that the economy was stable. It turned out the whole system was built on risky loans and bad debt, leading to a huge economic meltdown. Story 2. The lady who sued McDonald's for her coffee was absolutely in the right. Looking back, it's terrifying that anyone backed a corporation instead of an individual. Story 3. Most election watchers did not expect Trump to win in 2016. Nate Silver's polling analysis gave him a 29% chance of victory, with momentum moving towards Clinton in the final days. When he did win, even many of his own campaign staffers were surprised. Story 4. People made some major assumptions about Princess Kate before she had to come out and explain that she had cancer. Then all of a sudden, people were acting like they didn't just spend a lot of time playing detective on the internet. Story 5. Back in the 1970s, everybody thought there was going to be a population explosion, and we would all starve. Turns out people stopped having babies so much in the first world, at least. Also, if the population bomb didn't get us, we were going to die in a nuclear war. It was almost a certainty. Story 6. Russians taking Kiev in 3 days, followed by the rest of the country in 2 weeks. 3 years later, their navy is in hiding, and Ukraine has taken more Russian land in 2024 than Russia has taken Ukrainian land. Story 7. Ukraine has no chance of defending itself against the Russian army and will collapse within days to weeks. This is a widely held belief by politicians, military experts, and the majority consensus. Story 8. The text provided contains several grammatical and spelling issues, along with a sensitive topic that needs delicate handling. Here is a revised version to match your request. That it was a frivolous lawsuit and the old woman was just trying to get a payout in the McDonald's coffee lawsuit is a misconception. Absolutely criminal that she became the subject of late-night TV jokes, notably from Jay Leno. Additionally, the coffee was so hot that it caused severe burns. This version corrects spelling errors and refines the text for a general audience, ensuring sensitivity and clarity while removing inappropriate content. Story 9. Not sure how recent you mean by recent, but almost 60% of Americans approved of the way the Ohio National Guard handled the protesters at Kent State in the summer of 1970. Story 10. The woman who poured hot coffee from McDonald's on herself and won $1 million lawsuit was not a vexatious litigant. She was an 80-odd-year-old woman who fully admitted the unintentional spillage was her fault. But the coffee was so extremely hot she suffered third-degree burns to her legs and genitals, and she nearly died. Story 11. Weapons of mass destruction were used as an excuse to invade Iraq. I remember a Republican telling me I should start supporting the war or get fitted for my burqa. Now Republicans say they were against it all along. Story 12. It is important to note that popular consensus and popular narrative are two different things. Case in point, the consensus and narrative during the first year or so of COVID regarding lethality and the effectiveness of face masks. Story 13. Dietary fat being the primary cause for obesity, paid for by sugar and agriculture lobbies. Cigarettes not being incredibly unhealthy, paid for by tobacco lobbies. Reaganomics, from the point of view that it would help lower and middle-class folks. Weapons of mass destruction, placating Russian land grabs, housing market lies, tons of big business lies. The McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. Half of the stuff in encyclopedias and history books pre-internet era. Story 14. Key West campaign to ban cruise ships and won. Then, the higher government calculated that it would lead to the collapse of the local economy and vetoed it at the state level. Locals still grumble that they were overpowered by corporate interest and that democracy was shattered. But in my opinion, most tourist destinations have locals who dislike tourists and would vote for the same measures, and then suffer the consequences if it were allowed to happen. Checks and balances are important. Story 15. In December 2019, COVID first showed up in the United States in, I think, Seattle. If you graphed out the infection rate over that week or two, it was exponential growth. And that kind of terrified me, I guess because I can understand mathematics. Everyone was saying at the time that it's just overblown media hype. Story 16. Back in the 2000s, the popular narrative was that peak oil had hit or was imminent, so climate change would partially solve itself as we'd be forced to find an alternative. Actually, oil production has skyrocketed since. Governments are still prospecting as hard as they can, and there's more than enough in the ground to fry us. Story 17. In the 1960s, medical researchers thought there was no problem with smoking cigarettes. Yes, they were bought and paid for by tobacco companies, but they still formed a consensus. Hey, maybe medical researchers can still be bought and paid for today. Story 18. Man the Hunter Theory. Scientific studies support archaeological evidence that hunter-gatherer societies were egalitarian, and women likely hunted just as much as men before the agricultural revolution. Story 19. I am not sure if this is relevant, but I remember learning in school during the 1990s that we didn't know exactly what happened to the dinosaurs and there were many theories. In the last 20 years, there has been a strong consensus on the asteroid theory. I am curious about what changed. This was not some unconventional religious school either. The history of the dinosaurs was well known, just that there was a mass extinction event millions of years ago, and the cause was still somewhat unclear. Story 20. Prior to the discovery of her wreck on September 1, 1985, it was commonly accepted that the RMS Titanic sank intact as opposed to breaking apart. While numerous survivors did claim that the ship had split in two, others asserted that she hadn't, and as these survivors tended to be more reputable figures among her crew, the general public sided with them. Consequently, every film about the Titanic released prior to the wreck's discovery depicted her sinking intact, including A Night to Remember, which is otherwise widely regarded as the most historically accurate Titanic film. Interestingly, Herbert Selpin's Titanic, released in 1943, also depicted the final plunge in this manner. Given that it was a Nazi propaganda film that asserted that capitalism sank the ship, it's odd that it didn't depict the breakup as a further slight against the British. Story 21. The Monty Hall Problem. You are on a game show and given the choice of 3 doors. Behind one door is a car, behind the others, goats. You pick door 1, and the host, who knows what's behind the doors, opens door 3, which has a goat. He then asks, do you want to pick door number 2 instead? Is it to your advantage to switch your choice? Story 22. While crack is obviously harmful to a developing fetus, the term crack babies, that the media warned would someday overrun society as these children grew up, was exaggerated. There were predictions of unprecedented increases in crime and a generation hampered by disabilities that would burden taxpayers. Not surprisingly, the crack baby epidemic was centered on black mothers. This was as racist as the term welfare queens that Reagan talked about, and also untrue, by the way. Crack or cocaine has a similar effect on the fetus as smoking tobacco and is actually far less harmful than alcohol. Story 23. It took a decade or so, but in the early 2000s, most Americans disagreed with gay marriage. However, the Supreme Court made it legal in 2015. A Gallup poll in 2024 showed that 69% approved. Story 24. Cancel culture, when it turns out the person was innocent, showcases a troubling scenario. The audience that consumes the drama is so filled with hate and certainty that the accused is guilty. They destroy them on social media, send death threats, and end the person's career. Then, months later, after the damage is done, proof comes out that the accused is innocent.